This weekend is the 26th Sunday of Ordinary Time, and all three readings help us to focus in on how we can best share who we are and what we have with those around us. Every weekend, I drive from the University of Utah area through the streets of Salt Lake City onto my weekend work, where I celebrate Mass at St. Francis Xavier Catholic Church in Kearns, Utah. Almost every time I make this trip, I encounter someone begging on the side of the road for help. And I almost always give them something to eat, whether it's an energy bar or an energy drink, something to satisfy them. But it always leaves me with like an uncomfortable feeling. And I always think, oh, by the grace of God go I. This readings remind us of that uncomfortable situation in which perhaps we who have so much are encountered with people who have very little. The gospel story is a classic example. You have two people. One, Lazarus, a homeless guy, and a rich young man. Both, I believe, are tragic figures. Obviously, Lazarus is a tragic figure. He probably smells. He's wearing worn clothing. He's dirty, has sores all over his body, and even the dogs come and lick his sores. So a pretty tragic person. But equally, I think the rich man is also very tragic, maybe even more so. We hear that he dresses himself very nicely in fine clothing. He eats sumptuous meals each and every day, and he lives in a mansion. Why would he be such a tragic figure? Because he doesn't need anyone. He has all that he needs and more. And so he is self-sufficient. He doesn't need Lazarus, who, by the way, he steps over every single day when he leaves his house, for Lazarus is lying at his doorstep. And he doesn't need anyone else in his life. Well, as the story goes on, these two tragic figures die, as we all do. Lazarus is rewarded by going to heaven. There he has his true home, maybe a home he's always longed for. He is seated amongst all of the saints in heaven. So he has plenty of friends to enjoy and good conversation. And he is seated at the Lord's table where he feasts on the Lord's love and mercy. It's a beautiful image. However, the rich man dies, and of course, he goes to hell, pictured in the torments that he experiences as told to us in the gospel. But he's always been in hell. Hell is complete isolation. He sowed here on earth what he will receive in heaven. In other words, his wealth isolated him from everyone else and every good experience of community life here on earth. And he is rewarded with an everlasting or an eternal isolation from every other human being for all eternity. Of course, he reaches out to God and he says, "Why didn't you warn us? Why didn't you warn me?" But God quickly answers. He said, "I did. I gave you the entire Jewish law and all of the prophetic literature to tell you that if you believe you are self-sufficient, then you will be isolated by your own actions from everyone else and every good experience that comes from the communal life." There's a great spiritual principle that I try to keep in the back of my mind. And that is, if I isolate myself by what I have or what I choose to do, if I isolate myself from God, then I am almost always isolating myself from other people. Likewise, if I, by my actions or by my hoarding of what I have, isolate myself from other people, then I almost always isolate myself from the love of God. One thing that I think is very important for us all to remember is that we come into the world with nothing, and we're going to leave the world with nothing. In other words, as creative and as hardworking as we might think we are, and we probably are, the rewards that we get from all of our labors are not really our own. What we own, whether it's a house, a car, a bank account, or whether it's an immaterial good like our personality or our talents or our motivation or whatever things we might have or gifts that we might have accomplished, they're really a gift from the Lord. This weekend I had the opportunity to baptize a very small young woman, a child, with her family and her sponsors witnessing it. And it reminded me once again that we really come into this world with nothing. We are dependent on God and we are dependent on other people. And as I looked into the congregation this weekend and saw some elderly folks in our community, I'm also reminded that we leave this world with nothing. No one carts out their wealth to the next existence. And it reminds me that, everything that we have and everything that we are comes from God. And so I started to think, what does God want us to do with who we are and what we have? The church teaches us constantly in all of her doctrines, and it's spelled out very clearly in all of the scriptures, that we are to use who we are and what we have to build up the kingdom of God. To use who we are and what we have for the common good. In other words, we are to share everything. And in sharing everything, we come to the fullness of life. If you think about it, Mass is not really a complete experience until all the people are there. If we're missing one or two people or a number of people, the Mass is still the Mass because it is the Lord's Supper, but we're not quite the family of God. Likewise, if everyone is there and everyone is listening to the scriptures and everyone is trying to conform their wills to God's will, what a beautiful experience of the fullness of God alive in our community. That's what I think challenges us this weekend. It's not so much to worry about who has this or who has that, but it's more of the challenge of how do I best share all that I am and all that I have with you? And likewise, the scriptures challenges you to think about how you can share who you are and what you have with everyone that you come in contact with. The people that I see on the streets, I often stop and share with them. But they remind us, again, of that constant challenge that the kingdom of God is yet not complete. And yet, as instruments of God, God is calling us to make his kingdom come to fruition here on earth as it is in the kingdom of heaven. God bless you.